to the Work Trends podcast from Talent Culture. I'm your host, Megan Mbiro. Every week, I interview interesting people who are reimagining work. And be sure to check out our Work Trends Twitter chat events calendar located at talentculture.com on the podcast page. Welcome, everyone, to another fascinating Talent Culture Work Trends podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing a topic that many, actually too many of us, can relate to: how to overcome the urgency epidemic at work. So, everyone listening in, do me a favor. Close your eyes and think about the last time you were placed in a situation where the sense of urgency to complete a project overwhelmed you because the timing and expectations were unreasonable. And further, imagine you didn't have input on the project. So all you can do is react versus thinking strategically about this. I bet you're feeling pangs of anxiety, maybe your breathing is increased. You have this sort of overall sense of discomfort. Now, think about a time when you worked on something with a sense of urgency. You understood the validity of why it was urgent, were included in the backdrop of the project, and you were asked for your input. You're feeling differently, aren't you? Of course you are. And you know why? Because you had some control over it. This makes a world of difference. I'm not saying there's no stress involved, because it's more like managing stress. Now, I've just touched the tip of this iceberg, which is why we have Brandon Smith with us today. He's going to share a lot more information with us and dive more into the weeds so we can understand how to manage urgency in our lives better. Brandon Smith is a leading expert in leadership communication and a curer of workplace dysfunction. I mean, what's not to love, by the way? Just that sentence alone, right? Known as the workplace therapist, Brandon is a sought-after executive coach, TEDx speaker, author, award-winning business school instructor. You see where I'm going here? He has been featured in The Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, CNN, Fox News, NPR, Forbes, and many others for his expertise. His book, The Hot Sauce Principle: How to Live and Lead in a World Where Everything is Urgent All the Time, helps readers to master urgency so they can more effectively lead others, manage expectations, and I know you're out there, you might be feeling this the way I'm feeling it, prevent burnout at home. Welcome to Work Trends, Brandon.
Megan, I am so excited to be here. Thank you for the warm introduction.
You got it. I can't wait to dig into this conversation with you. You know, many of the people listening to this podcast can identify with this topic. So you, my friend, have a captive audience for the next 20 minutes or so. No pressure.
You know, it's so funny, Megan. Everyone I talk to, there's two things that are true about our workplace today. First, time's our most precious resource. It's not money, it's time. And second, everything is urgent all the time. And talk about, just a petri dish for anxiety. I mean, it can really, really burn us up if we're not careful.
I know there's a lot that you and I can talk about. And if we had our way, Brandon, we'd have 20 hours of a podcast. But talk to us about what interests you the most about this topic and why you're choosing to focus on it.
So my overall, if I had to put my stake in the ground and say, what's my purpose in life? It is to eliminate all workplace dysfunction everywhere forever. That's my purpose. So I'm gainfully employed with plenty of job security. I was kidding. I said, I just had figured it out. And then there was a pandemic. So flips things up on its head. And the reason why I wrote this book was because this was one of those many flavors of workplace dysfunction that everyone I was talking to was feeling. It didn't matter if they were working for a university, a nonprofit, a for-profit company, a startup. It didn't matter. They were just dealing with this sense of, hot sauce being poured on everything. And hot sauce is the analogy I use for urgency. And so I wanted to try and write a book that would be at least somewhat of a help, somewhat of a cure for that particular dysfunction.
I have to ask you now, are you a hot sauce fan?
I am. I do. I love hot sauce.
See, there you go. So, obviously describing what we're feeling is very important right now, talking about it. That's why we're here. So tell us, when you talk about urgency, is there such a thing as being good or bad? And maybe describe what that means.
Yeah, so the answer to that question is overall, yes, it's both good and bad. A little bit of urgency is a good thing. We need urgency. Urgency motivates us. I always kid every year. Well, my kids make fun of me because every year when I get about a month out from my annual physical, boy, that's when I turn on the health routines. Like, I get working out really well and I eat my diet because I want to show up to physical, really good shape. And they're like, Dad, that's ridiculous. You should be doing that 12 months. But that date in time, that physical creates urgency for me. So urgency can motivate us, just like hot sauce. A little bit of urgency, a little bit of hot sauce gives focus, gives flavor, creates priority. It's a good thing. But just like hot sauce, if too much urgency, if everything that comes out of the kitchen is doused in hot sauce, the appetizer and the salad and the entree and the brownie at the end and the iced tea, we're going to be curled up in a ball wanting relief. We won't taste anything. So a little bit of it used in the right doses and the right times is a really healthy thing for us. It keeps us moving forward. But too much does the exact opposite effect. Overwhelms us, confuses us, and that can lead to burnout.
So talk to us about the bad part of this, because I think a lot of people are experiencing this right now. Tell us a little bit more about what that looks like to you. What you're hearing from people, because I think so often we don't really know what's good or bad. We're just sort of in this vortex of going and going and going.
Yeah. So let's talk about workplace first, because it also happens in our personal life as well. But workplace, it comes from good intentions and what leaders were taught they're supposed to do. So John Kotter, famous kind of change guru out of Harvard for the last 30, 40 years. Any book you read on change management, John was probably either heavily quoted or co-authored it. And he's got a famous change model. And he says the first thing you got to start with is a high enough sense of urgency. So leaders are taught really early on, if we need people to change, we got to start with urgency. And there's so many organizations right now needing to go through transformations, whether it's technology transformations or whatever happens to be. And so what leaders are doing is they're running around making everything urgent and then patting themselves on their back, going back to their office, closing the door and saying, I did a great job today. And all they did was just create confusion and chaos because they didn't prioritize the urgency. They just said, it's all urgent right now. Go. And so that's part of the challenge that I hear in the workplace, because people try to meet those requests and it results in 12, 13, 14-hour days because they're trying to meet all these demands when really the demands are unrealistic. So that's a large part of what we're seeing in the workplace. It's pressure that leaders are putting into the system. They know they're creating discomfort, but they're creating too much of it. And so that's part of the challenge. Now, we also have it in our personal lives as well. There's a lot of urgency and pressure to, have perfect family or the perfect kids or get our kids into the best colleges or whatever happens to be. And that also creates a lot of this kind of urgency that can be overwhelming. And so when you combine those two things, it's like we really don't have a relief. We have it at work and then we go home and have it there too.
So let's talk about what works, where we can all start right now if we're trying to create urgency in others. What's the right way to go about this?
So the right way to do it is just like you'd be cooking a recipe. Okay, we use hot sauce. We love it because it does add flavor and priority. But it's that second word I use there, priority. That is the key word in this. So you're using it on what you want to be a priority. So I'll tell you my favorite story. I share a version of this in the book, but it came from a client of mine. So back in days when precedented times when we were in person and I would talk about this concept, I'd hand out those little bottles of Tabasco. Have you ever seen those little bottles you get?
Oh, I love those. Yeah. They're so cute.
I hand them out so everybody gets one and I say, put this on your desk as a reminder of this is what urgency is so you don't overwhelm your folks. So I was telling this to a client of mine and he had a small 50-person software technology company. He was an anxious, nervous guy anyway, so kind of an odd combination for an entrepreneur. But he was creating so much urgency in his company and everyone was feeling overwhelmed. So I told him this idea or this concept. Well, he went out to the store on his own and he bought 3 bottles of hot sauce and stuck them on his desk. 1, 2, 3. And whenever a project was urgent, when he assigned that project to one of his team members, he handed them one of the bottles of hot sauce. And he said, you got to keep this bottle until the project's done, and then you get the bottle back. And here was the best part about this. He only had 3 bottles. So only 3 things could be urgent at a time. So that is a great way of thinking about how to do this the right way. Limit what you can make urgent at a time. My recommendation is 3 to no more than 5. The best teams, the best departments, the best organizations are executing off of 3 to 5 priorities. So use urgency on those things. Use hot sauce on those things, but let everything else just be relief from the heat.
At what point does a leader know, okay, I'm done with the 3 to 5, I get to give out some new bottles of hot sauce? Is there a time frame where you're like, okay, if it's not done by this time, I mean, I know I'm getting into the weeds here with you, but hey, there's people out there that want to be better.
Yeah, so urgency, you cannot have urgency without a time frame. I can't say to you, gosh, you better get your health in order, Megan. It's an important thing. You'd say, okay, thanks, I've been here and that's fine. If I said, boy, you better do it by whatever date or bad things are going to happen, then okay, now I got a date. I have like a deadline. It's like me going to the doctor's office. So you have to have a deadline in which to take action. So I think that's important. So you can always have rolling urgency items. When one gets knocked off, you can add a new one. But you just have to make sure you're not doing so many that no one knows what to focus on.
Well, I was just going to say, is there such a thing as creating too much urgency? And then what are you seeing happening for those people who are still tempted to do this? Because let's be honest, we're going to listen today and we're going to go, oh yeah, you're so right. Yeah. And then tomorrow we're giving out 8 bottles of hot sauce.
Right. So what they're going to see is nothing's going to get accomplished because everyone's spinning. So when you hit the tipping point, you create spin. You're not going down a path. We're not focused. So it's like little things are getting ticked off, but nothing's ever really moving forward. I hear a lot about this in kind of like IT departments because everyone wants all this change to happen. And then none of the implementations are happening on time because too many things are going. So spin is one at an organizational level. At an individual level, you're going to start to see people do 2 things. First, leave for other jobs. And second, become apathetic, which is a sign of burnout. Because they're just overwhelmed. I mean, their mouth's on fire. They just become apathetic. That's after they've put in crazy hours. So that's another sign along the way that you're probably doing too much is if you're talking to your folks and they're doing crazy hours. Or if we think about kind of still in COVID times, you're scheduling calls at 7:30 in the morning all the way to 7 at night, which a lot of organizations are doing. They've kind of realized, oh, hey, you're not commuting. I know exactly where you are. We're having a call at 8 in the morning. Or we're having a call at 5:35 and people are doing it, which is, a bit insane. But that's what's happening.
So for those of us out there who are looking to manage this, I mean, do you have techniques for managing the urgency that's being put upon us? How do we react when somebody is asking us to do too much?
Well, gosh, I wouldn't be very helpful if I didn't have at least some techniques. So let me give a couple pieces of advice or some strategies. So the first is, this is always a good general concept anyway. From now on, don't ever view your leader or your manager or your boss as your leader, your manager, or your boss. Never do that from now on. From now on, view them as your number one customer. Because they are. And we think of them as a customer, it unlocks all these important skills that we need to be using, like managing their expectations, like providing them proactively recommendations, not waiting for them to come find us. So we need to be managing them more than they're managing us. That will help control the flow of hot sauce. And so part of that it also means that when your leader asks for everything to be urgent all the time, we need to be able to go back to them and in a healthy way have a prioritization conversation. Hey, Miss Leader, I really want to meet your needs, and I'm happy to do that. But given our current resources and constraints, what would help me considerably is to know what's the priority of these 5 items. Which one do you want first, second, third, fourth? I can do more and do them faster, but I'm going to need more resources. So we have some of those conversations, just like you would with a customer. When a customer asks for things outside of the scope of what you're providing her or him, you say, well, I can get you that, but it's going to cost you more. So we need to be able to have those conversations. Works really, really well with rational leaders.
And ones that aren't?
So part of my training, my background's somewhat eclectic. I have a clinical therapy background as well, which is where the workplace therapist handle comes in. And so as any good therapist, one of the fundamental tenets is setting healthy boundaries. So when an individual is not rational, they are going to threaten your boundaries. They're going to want the moon and the stars, and they're going to expect you to do it in, 40-hour work week. And so we're going to have to be really, really firm on what is possible and not possible. And hopefully they learn to respect those boundaries. If they don't, then in any unhealthy relationship, we have to decide if it's time for it to come to an end. And maybe we need to move on.
Absolutely. I cannot believe it, but we have reached crystal ball time. You have shared so many good tidbits with us during this conversation, but I want to hear from you. Do you have any lingering thoughts that we either haven't discussed about what the future of work is going to look like? What's next?
Well, you know what? It's a great segue to what we just talked about. The future of work is going to be a really exciting time. When I look in my crystal ball, I see it's going to be an exciting time and place where more of our personal lives are going to be factored into the equation. There's going to be more flexibility, and I'm sure this is nothing different than what you've been hearing before from others. But I will say that there's going to be a lot more burden on us to set and keep our boundaries because there's going to be no clear breaks between work and home life. I think most workplaces are going to go hybrid, so I have a feeling the roads are going to be pretty empty on Mondays and Fridays. But that also means when we're home and everyone knows we're home, they may want to do those calls at 7 p.m. or 7 a.m. And so setting boundaries is going to be really, really important, and keeping them is going to be really, really important. So that's going to be a burden we didn't have to do 20, 30 years ago and prior, but because work was at work, but it's something that was a challenge and an opportunity we'll have to take on.
Brandon Smith, aka the Workplace Therapist. Enjoy some more of that hot sauce, would you?
I'm definitely going to.
If you're enjoying listening to this Work Trends podcast, do me a favor, share it with your friends, your family, your colleagues, so they can stay current on what's happening in the world of work. And be sure to listen into our next podcast when I'm going to be speaking with another really interesting Work Trends guest. Catch up with you next time. Thanks to listening to Work Trends from Talent Culture. Join us every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern for a live Twitter chat with our podcast guest. To learn more about guests featured on today's show, visit the show notes for this episode at talentculture.com and help us spread the word. Subscribe to Work Trends wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us a rating, review in iTunes. Share Work Trends with your coworkers, your friends. Look forward to it. See you next time.